Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 69th audio file in the audiocast series known as the Q News Patriot. I am the Q News Patriot. My name is SG Anon. I'm coming to you this evening with a jam-packed file. I'm going to try to condense it down and consolidate it in a way that's easily digestible, but there is just so much happening in the world. We're now bearing witness to a season where the populism is sort of sweeping the fervor of the world. We're witnessing that we the people patriotic spirit reemerge in stunning form in the NATO bloc especially. We're witnessing that ideological transition happening slowly, but most assuredly from that center-left, progressive and liberal side over to more conservative values, even if the characterization or misnomer conservative is not being used, right? And I say misnomer because while we are all conservative, we are primarily humanist. We are primarily interested in the collective good, but from an individualized perspective, we want the respect of our sovereignty and our individual expression, but we also want the best for humanity as a whole. And so while we can be liberal, Democrat, Republican, conservative, independent, libertarian, etc., and all of these are perfectly well, and we can also be communist, socialist, nihilistic, etc., what this process is highlighting is those that are for humanity and for the longevity of humanity in the best way and in the best form possible, and those who are not. And this process, as we move through this process and we move through 2024, this is going to be tested, I think, at a nation state level in stunning fashion, not only here in the United States, but around the world, and in particular in the Western bloc of nations, as we look to shift around some of the geopolitical politics, arrangements, and structures that have existed in the world, certainly since the Second World War. But I would say going back really to the U.S. Civil War and the corporatized institutions that led to piecemealing of the planet and sidelining we the people in the process over this last century plus. Without further ado, Patriots, let's go ahead and get right to it. Let's talk about some of the things that we're actually having significant successes with, things that are driving the desperation maneuvers that we can expect to see from those communities, those intelligence communities primarily, and those entrenched black hat militarized assets and operators in the world. And what drives that desperation and what drives those moves and counter moves, if you will, in this espionage war that we're all in, is the shifting around of levels above them that lawfully and publicly are known to be in control in some form or fashion of greater processes. And so, for example, capitulation of royals ties directly into the financial system and changes that have been happening in the financial systems of the world, right? It also ties into the broader aspect in many regards of the human and child trafficking, which was often facilitated and participated in by those family members, right? We know this out to be true of a number of different people. The capitulation of the political class, right? Those that have influence, especially on committees here in the United States of America, magistrate panels or local councils, if you will, and larger municipalities also under the parliamentarian system in Western Europe, in the Commonwealth realms, right? Just as a disclaimer, I'm not an expert in these systems, but the equivalent sort of exists in pseudo fashion, and so these areas have very public control over other arenas that are publicly known, such as the deployment of various forces and weaponry around the world, the sending of money, right, to prop up rogue terrorist regimes and really what amounts to rump states in different areas to prevent broader exposure. Things like this and things of this nature happen because that group, that class that is ostensibly in charge to some degree, at least legally on paper, of these intelligence communities and these militarized actors around the world, those who have participated in biological terrorism, organized kidnapping, organized pedophilia, organized secret space technology suppression, etc., will be brought out. And so in this process, those particular groups to be brought out are witnessing the capitulation or the disappearance of, in many regards, individuals that would be giving them orders that they themselves know are coming, right? You sort of set up a self-fulfilling veil by prompting the public figure to give the order that then allows you to do the very thing that you have every intention of doing anyway. And that is the espionage root out process that we're all living through. And so recently, we had a fantastic rooting out of the U.S. DoD at a very high level, actually with the gentleman known as Lloyd Austin. Now, I put out fairly early on, as it pertained to the disappearance of Lloyd Austin, that while something was amiss, it did not make any sense to me that this individual would have been eliminated in the Ukrainian countryside. I understand that the Russian FSB or sources associated with the Russian FSB have put that out, but I'm more and more convinced that even that is a cover story for what has actually occurred with the secretary, and one of the reasons that we've not seen him in a live press conference really since all of this event and the expansion of conflict in the Mediterranean has begun. So an article taken from December 20th of 2023 reads, U.S. Defense Secretary visits aircraft carrier, hails linchpin of Middle East deterrence. This is an article taken from Reuters. Aboard the USS Gerald Ford, who is the unelected president of the United States of America, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin visited the Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier in the Eastern Mediterranean on Wednesday and thanked its crew for their role in preventing a broader conflict in the Middle East. The nuclear-powered Ford, a small floating city of over 4,000 people, became a powerful symbol of American military resolve. Austin extended the Ford's deployment 3 times, hoping its presence would make Iran and Iran-aligned groups think twice before joining the fight against Israel. So this visit occurred on December the 20th, 2023. But notably, 2 days later, he was reported by CNN to have had a procedure done on the 22nd of December, which occurred while he was supposedly on leave, and which was a minimally invasive surgical procedure called a prostatectomy. A statement from his doctors at Walter Reed said on Tuesday, a prostatectomy. Keep that in mind. Keep that terminology in mind, because this is how psychological and counterintelligence operations occur. He had a procedure on December the 22nd called a prostatectomy. So he's in the Mediterranean 36 hours prior to this. Why would he be there and not at home arranging the necessary, chain of command resources, informing the necessary individuals, perhaps drafting a quick email to the White House Chief of Staff, for example? Why were these things not occurring, and why did this not occur? Austin went and visited an active combat zone. He didn't have anything to say when he came back, and furthermore, he went there 36 hours to 48 hours prior to a minimally invasive but still surgical procedure to remove part or all of his prostate. And remember, this procedure happened at Walter Reed, and during the procedure, he was under general anesthesia. And then a little over a week later, on January 1, the article says Austin began experiencing severe pain and was taken back to the hospital. The statement from his doctor said the complications included nausea with severe abdominal, hip, and leg pain, and he had a UTI. But then they said that he had a UTI. Well, that doesn't cause leg pain, right? And then on January the 2nd, he was admitted to the intensive care unit. So none of this makes any sense. And when we look at the time frame and we look at the terminology, it's eerily similar to this terminology published January the 17th in an article from Town and Country magazine. King Charles will receive prostate treatment in the hospital next week. Buckingham Palace released a statement regarding the king's health on the 17th of January. This was also shortly after Kensington Palace announced that Kate Middleton, the Duchess of Wales, and the wife of Prince William, was hospitalized for an abdominal surgery as well, right? So are we witnessing a coordinated submission at that very high level of banking and finance power, which controls the intelligence community? And are we also witnessing the submission of a top-tier agent of the military-industrial complex and a discussion that occurred in the Mediterranean Sea, at sea, in international waters, in the jurisdiction of maritime law, to discuss that coming submission? I think that's exactly what occurred. And if we come back to the Reuters advertisement that was put up on the web page, the video that shows Lloyd Austin visiting a carrier at the heart of Middle Eastern maritime deterrence, what is so incredible with this video is you see a number of different short frames. There's not a lot of detail shown, but they pay close attention to hand gestures, the facial features, and the overall disposition that Mr. Austin expresses is one of sort of solitude and solemnity, I think is the word, solemnness. This is not a man who is happy to be there. This is not a man who is excited to be congratulating these individuals. There's very little video shown with them actually speaking and them actually having interactions. So this and what's amazing is you get to a point in the video, it's about 40 seconds in or so, where it does show him giving a discussion, a short clip to a military reporter, ostensibly, and he has his collared shirt not only unbuttoned at the very top. He has no tie on, but he has the top button completely undone. And so this shows that someone has had the noose around their neck freed. Someone has, and the deal is done. The tie is off, right? So a prostatectomy at the same time, or around about the same time, within 3 weeks of a prostate procedure on King Charles, and within a week and a half of an abdominal procedure also on the Duchess of Wales, I think it is absolutely the case that we are witnessing the capitulation and submission and defection of influential parties that are involved at that supranational, that transnational level of control that is above presidencies, is above the machinations of your federal governments and municipalities and different theaters and nation states around the world, and that utilizes that transnational status to leverage the control of the intelligence community, which itself leverages both the military-industrial complex and blackmails and controls those governmental pulpits of power. And so that particular aspect, that particular group of individuals that takes those orders, that is manipulated and directed by these individuals, which has also now become a self-fulfilling beast, right? Because it is that same community that often blackmails these individuals, which supposedly are holding the reins to them. So it is this self-serving, self-insulating hydra. That hydra is now in full panic mode because these individuals have been given a way out. And being given a way out means what? The loss of actionable intelligence and the loss of resources here on the ground. The exposure of different networks of dark money, different networks of trafficking, different hidden safe houses and secret military projects, the exposure of different logistical storage facilities, R&D facilities, underground facilities. All of these sorts of things come with the change of information from one side to another. Those playing the game don't necessarily get a free pass, right? But those who cooperate and help us put an end to this great age of evil will receive a legacy preservation, I think, as they probably should, because they are defecting to this side and assisting us. I take no pleasure in acknowledging that some of these individuals may not pay the public ultimate price that we out there would want them to pay all of the way through, but we want the top. We want the organizers. We want the planners. We want the benefactors. We want the investors. We want every single party that was responsible for the design and the implementation of the wrongs that have been perpetrated against humanity, certainly in the last 150 years, but you can make the case going back a number of thousands of years. And those individuals and those circles and those institutions and entities are what must crumble and what must be brought down. And we need battlefield intelligence to do that. And they are responding with powerful desperation. Just recently leaked out that Germany is sketching out a vision of how Russia may spill over into a NATO-wide conflict. An analysis called Alliance Defense 25 suggests that by 2025, we'll be embroiled in a full-throttle World War III European war involving Poland, Germany, the NATO states, all of the NATO bloc, particularly the Baltic states, as well as Romania, Moldova, and the central portion of Europe where Hungary, Slovakia, etc. is. So you're witnessing the transformation in some regards of the mindset of those controllers from one of total power and total hegemony to destabilize as rapidly as possible, move ahead with the agenda as rapidly as possible, because an absolution is coming, and there is a powerful burden of proof that also comes with that absolution. And I do think that we're going to see some of these events play out in a very powerful way. I don't think that we're going to see a full-bore World War III standing army shooting large weapons at one another. I think that we are actually setting up in Germany, especially for a possible failure to start with a military coup. And again, this is a possibility. This is my opinion only, but based on the research with the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland party, really what it is equivalent to the German version of the MAGA party. This group has been heavily involved with trying to put an end to the war in Ukraine and open up further negotiations with Moscow, and members associated with this group, although the group rejects the association formally, members associated with this group were just recently targeted by the German regime. I think it was over 20 of them for supposedly conspiring with Russia to install a more pro-Russian policy upon their victory in German elections. And so we're witnessing that same sort of attitude playing out, I think, in NATO military, such as in France, that military very closely tracking the events on the ground inside of France. The same is true of the German military monitoring its own, especially those that have just recently been deployed to Poland. And Poland is involved, really as of today, with essentially setting up what I believe to be a massive false flag that's going to come from Ukraine into Poland. We're going to see NATO sacrifice bunt Ukraine, essentially, and claim that the attack was assisted by the Russian, invasion of Ukraine, etc., and that Poland is going to have to invade the countryside of Ukraine to ensure its national sovereignty. When that occurs, you'll see a series, I think, of false flag attacks in the Baltic states and as well as in the northeast of Poland along the Suwalki Gap. And so these militaries are preparing for these contingencies and opening back channels of communication with one another. Just recently, we had an article out that German military cooperation will not necessarily exclude Russia when it comes to the events happening in Europe. And so that's sort of a sleight of hand hint, if you will, that they're going to consider the discussion before an escalation of conflict. Nobody wants to lose large levels of their populations. We live in a digital world where all of us are sort of on this train together, and we all realize, across nation state boundaries that we primarily believe the same things. And this is true in the military patriotic circles as well. But you do have those black hat actors, those intelligence community actors, and those black hat mill-industrial complex warlords masquerading as generals, right, who are involved in violations of Geneva, who are involved in violations of free state sovereignty, who have been participating in projects, for example, like Leonardo and the attack that occurred on the 2020 U.S. election, and different attacks that have occurred on NATO members from other NATO members in these intelligence mill-industrial communities, right? And so there is a tremendous amount of crime against humanity, of treason against their nations, of treason against their oath, dereliction of duty, seditious conspiracy, trafficking, weapons smuggling, gun running. All of these sorts of things apply to this class of individuals that has existed in between the machinations of government at the optic level publicly and the push and pull of the whim of worldwide finance and worldwide transnational elitist authority, the Royals, the Rockefellers, the Bushes, etc., and this community sort of existing in the middle but controlling really both. And so this group, the reason I wanted to highlight these false flags that are likely coming is because if we go back to, let me see here, if we go back to 1914 Europe, I'm going to see if I can share the screen here with you, Anons. This is a map of Europe as it was when we, the people, were in control of most of our of the continent, right? When we, the people, ancestral lines had laid claim to the lands that were ours. And no, that didn't necessarily occur over that 500-year period prior to 1914 in an honest way, but it occurred in a lawful way. It occurred in a way that was not being coerced by an outside force. It was organic violence with one another. And while I take no pleasure in saying that, we are so free in this world that we can choose to act in unfree ways. We can choose to act in suppressive, violent manner. We can choose to act in bondage or from a place of bondage, right? And so we arrived by 1914 at this arrangement. And with the launch of the Federal Reserve System the year prior, the successful coup of the United States of America 40 years prior to that in 1871, and really beginning during the U.S. Civil War, and the loans that were paid out, the different documents that were prepared, the replacement of the Constitution, etc. Once that process was achieved and fully ironed out and isolated and concreted in that Western bloc, the United States of America, the powerhouse economy of the world at that time, it became time to make good on Albert Pike's letters about the 3 World War process over a 150-year period of time that would transition the entire planet to one world governmental rule underneath this satanic Luciferian dark occultist cabal in the form of multiple totalitarian superstates. And so World War I was the first salvo in disjointing and destroying the territorial integrity and the ancestral claim that was had by we the people to areas of land here in the world, here in the Western world, right? We're not discussing, all of the different things that happened around the entire rest of the planet in the 500 years prior, which itself could be a number of files on its own. But I encourage everyone to go read the history. It's very, very important. So we arrive at this point in 1914. By 1917, we have this. The 1917 Bolshevik coup neuters Russia, right, takes out the Romanov dynasty, brings the Russian government into a place of a much more open and accepting agreement with the British Empire and the Allied powers, the Entente powers. And this group, of course, is indicative of the cabal. This group is the group that is seeking to change the balance of power and geopolitics in Europe, and then export that change to the rest of the world throughout the 20th century, which they did very, very effectively. The one I want to highlight to each of you is this right here. The Kingdom of Poland, prior to World War I, existed essentially as a protectorate. Let's come over here. Existed as a protectorate, a sort of semi-sovereign, semi-independent province of the Russian Empire in Central Europe. We see very clearly Warsaw, Lutz. Right here is Vilnius. This is modern-day Belarus in this area. This is modern-day Lithuania in this area. Königsberg was later renamed Kaliningrad and taken by Russia during those first 2 world wars. And then, of course, we have the Baltic states here, and we have the entirety of the Finnish countryside being a part of the Russian Empire, with St. Petersburg being here in the northwest of the nation, of the nation state. But by 1917, we have a completely different picture. By 1917, we have the Kingdom of Poland coming out and proclaiming itself to be an independent state, coinciding right along in the same time frame as that Bolshevik revolution in Moscow. We have a number of different changes happening, of course, with the boundaries of the Ottoman Empire, the boundary of the Romanian countryside, etc. And so what happens as a result of this, let me see if I can move this block. What happens as a result of the changes that occurred beginning in 1917 with U.S. involvement in the war, and then post-World War I in 1918 with the Versailles Treaty and the actual ending treaties of the war, we end up with this map. So this is now the Kingdom of Poland recognized as a nation. This is hundreds of thousands of square miles of territory that ancestrally has been Russian. We also reduced territory that was Germanic in nature, but Germany was allowed to keep an area called East Prussia, which borders up by Danzig. And then you would have the Königsberg area, right, of course, in there, what is modern-day Kaliningrad. We have the creation of the Baltic states in this process, as well as the creation of the separate nation of Finland. And we have the expansion of the Romanian border as well on the other side of this river. And forgive me, I'm not certain the name of this river. And so this is millions of square miles of territory that has been partitioned off. We saw that partition happen yet again throughout the 20th century, and we've seen this strategy and this playbook played out in different sectors around the world, to include the Pacific theater, the sub-Saharan African theater, and even territory that has been shifted around and taken away from we the people in the Central and South Americas. So this playbook, right, this pattern that has occurred in the last 125 years or so, while I don't think that we can get all of the way back to that 1914 situation, I think that we can broach some of that in the middle, and that there is a compromise to be had at that nation state level in a militarized fashion that is playing itself out. But it's playing itself out under the need of this intelligence community, under the need of this military industrial bioterrorism warfare complex machine to attempt to preserve itself. We're literally allowing them to, in their efforts to preserve and prevent themselves from exposure, do the heavy lifting for us. That heavy lifting does not, give us any pleasure here in the West, because our systems, our economies, our societies are very heavily squeezed by that heavy lifting process, right? They're very heavily squeezed by what's occurring here in the world. But we are tough and we are strong, and there is a reason that we have to see this process through, right? There is a reason that these events are occurring. There are some territories that have to be replaced, right? There are some areas that, quite frankly, have to be purged of biological terrorism. That is coming to the Middle East in a very significant way not that long from now, primarily because Turkey is heavily involved in conducting cross-border operations right now into Syria. They've discussed expanding those operations into northern Iraq. They're targeting U.S. military black hat installations. They're targeting which we could call rogue military installations. They're targeting CIA, and Mossad installations in these areas of the countryside. And the Turks are very concerned about what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in the Lebanon region with Hezbollah now. And of course, the Ottomans, for a long time, again, right up until 1917, 1918, were the largest empire in the Arab world. They were that way for more than 500 years. They're the de facto protectors of the Muslim world. They see themselves that way. There is a long-standing animus that exists between the Ottomans and the Persians, what would now be the modern-day Iranians, but they do agree to be essentially brothers in arms in a faith-based way, right? We worship the same God, we just do so in a different fashion, no different than the brothers in arms situation that is sort of attitudinally prevalent from the Russian soldiers against the Ukrainian soldiers, and the Ukrainians to the Russians. They're all Slavic brothers in arms. So Turkey is very, very interested in what occurs in Gaza and in Lebanon and soon to be Syria. And we're witnessing, and really we're witnessing the resistance to those processes beginning to wear itself out and wear thin. And the Turks are very concerned, I think, about what's going to come to their doorstep with the pipelines and the canals that are being talked about from this Israeli Mossad locus of control. And it is worth highlighting in this discussion, just as a sidebar here, that the Israeli government is no different than the government of all of our Western nations, in the sense that it has gone completely rogue, and it is entirely captured by its own intelligence community, and is not reflective of the vast population of the Jews in that nation, right? The Jewish people that are in Israel. This is another example of we the people having to be preserved in the greatest form possible. But I believe that a military operation into Israel is absolutely coming, and a possible renaming of the nation state of Israel to a more ancestrally appropriate name. And I'm not qualified to say what that might or might not be, but research suggests a number of different options, including Judea. A renaming is very possible in this process. I say that, and people get very concerned about the possibility of an Arab coalition going in and just sort of, acting out, revenge retribution on the civilian populations of we the people in Israel and in the Jewish communities. And I acknowledge that these types of concerns are always a concern in wartime. But the main difference between all ages prior to now and now is the interconnectivity and the speed at which that interconnectivity occurs around the rest of the world. All of us are transparently on display with one another, deep fakes notwithstanding, right? And we do have to do good research, but we're transparently on display. We can see what's happening with one another, and everyone has to be on their best behavior, even if they have to see through a negative process all of the way till the end. We've seen that played out with Russia. We've seen that patient and elegant methodical strategy, heightening concern, I think, for human life in the Pacific played out from China. We've seen that process played out even by some Belarusian actors, right, and different dissident actors within the NATO bloc. We've certainly seen restraint showed by components of the U.S. military that are patriotically loyal and understand the broad continuity mission that is at play here in the U.S. to participate in these broader worldwide changes. So all of that, is necessary and all of that conduct has to be above reproach in order to move the world to a higher state of being. And that's really where we're going, right? We're coming from the darkness out into the light. And I want each of you to see this because, when I talk about things having to happen in certain ways, and this possibility of the nation state of Israel falling under foreign occupation for a period of time, and I think that is going to come led by the Ottoman Turks. The overarching theme with most of these operations has been and has always been the biological terrorism component, the hyper advanced weaponry, the biological and chemical weaponry, the ability of this community, this large S intelligence espionage traitor network around the world to control different factions of government, different behaviors of military brass through threat, through blackmail, through bribery, etc. All of that comes back to needing to be rooted out. And a lot of that is found in these weapons of mass destruction, right? These weapons that could cause mass worldwide chaos very quickly. And from an article actually put out by CBS, if you can believe it, back when journalism was still sort of journalism, November the 15th of 1998, I'm going to bring all of you over here to see this. A senior aide to Israel's prime minister is rejecting a report that Israel is trying to create a biological weapon that would harm Arabs, but not Jews. He says such stories only prove there is no limit to human gullibility or to the desire to sell newspapers. However, Britain's Sunday Times carried the report, which said Israeli scientists are trying to identify genes carried only by Arabs. This is so the scientists can create a genetically modified bacterium or virus that would only attack people with those genes. The Times cited unidentified Israeli military and Western intelligence sources. It says the idea of such research has provoked controversy in Israel because of parallels with genetic experiments performed by the Nazis during World War II. There is a broader mission at play in the world. There is a broader collapse of our enemies happening, and there is a broader maneuver or a broader series of maneuvers that is being made by them to avoid exposure of exactly these types of crimes, exactly this type of criminality that has gone on to manipulate, coerce, and destroy the integrity of all of the pulpits of power in all of our governments around the world, right? And we're seeing those pulpits of power now beginning to realize desperation moves are the only options they have left. I think it is extremely possible in this process, and I'm not necessarily proud to say this, but I think based on the research that we're seeing, it is very possible that we're going to see the GOP primaries affected in some fashion by this concept of domestic terrorism. In other words, MAGA and conservative groups being identified and classed as domestic terrorists by Homeland, and we know that this has occurred in the last couple of years, is likely to be used as a means to attempt to bar or disparage individuals from being able to participate on the ballots due to association with domestic terrorism. And the phrase is very important, domestic terrorism, because it is these types of hyper focused, very emotional atom bombs in that narrative linguistic space that cause reactions which override slower, higher level processes, rationale, reason, appreciation, perspective, introspection, things of this nature. So recently, as a matter of fact, today, Rolling Stone runs an article, top Arizona Democrat Adrian Fontes, Biden's DOJ is failing to protect election workers from domestic terrorism. Biden's Justice Department is too worried about political blowback to protect election workers, Arizona Secretary of State Fontes tells the Rolling Stone. So the choice of words, very, very intentional, right? If we come over here, this is from June of 2022. So this is just, about a year and 6 months ago. Patriot Front arrests show shift in policing of extremists. Ties between white nationalists and local law enforcement often keep cops from policing extremist violence, domestic terrorism, extremist violence. And we've seen the Patriot Front shown out, for example, just in the last few days, marching on the World Trade Center, sort of hinting at this idea of a false flag terrorist attack to be blamed on domestic terrorist groups. And they're clearly operating as federal agents. You can see the khaki pants, every single one of them, the same pair of khaki pants, the same face covering, almost like they bought them at the same store together. The boots are the same. The tread on the boots in many regards is even the same. So you know that the boots are the same. And the fact that they would choose 9/11, it looks like this article came out yesterday. The fact that they would choose 9/11 and the World Trade Centers as this area to march and paint this picture of really what amounts to patriotic we the people groups here in the United States of America is very, very telling. The concept of linking patriot actors who have the nation's best interest and the best interest of their community and their constitutional rights at heart, painting that group as the extremist group has always been the narrative, the tactic, right? The narrative mental tactic deployed through authoritarian regimes all throughout history, and we're seeing it deployed now. And the reason I think that it is very possible that we're going to see some sort of malfeasance or some sort of nefarious attempts regarding the GOP primaries at that community level, right? The involvement of domestic terrorism or extremism in the basis to try and subvert those processes is because the Department of Homeland Security has already paid for something sort of along those very lines. Taken from their own website, dhs.gov/TVTP grants, Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention Grant Program handled by the Center for Prevention Programs and Partnerships, or CP3. For fiscal year of 2023 and to go into effect in 2024, DHS announced the award of 34 grants totaling $20 million under under the Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention Grant Program. This program provides financial assistance to eligible applicants to develop sustainable, multidisciplinary targeted violence and terrorism prevention capabilities in local communities, to pilot innovative prevention approaches, and to identify prevention best practices that can be replicated in communities across the country. What is worth noting here, Patriots and Anons, is that the label of terrorist or the charge of terrorism or committing terrorist activities is also utilized underneath the Patriot Act of the United States of America to deprive individuals charged with that criminality of a significant amount of not only their constitutional rights, but their due process as well. So moving through this, what are we seeing? We're seeing the subversion and denial of due process with President Trump. I think it is intellectually immature to think that we would be exempt from that in this process. And I think it's very, very possible that the parting ways of funding that has already occurred to local communities from the Department of Homeland Security, primarily handled by the Center for Prevention Programs and Partnerships, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency, indicates that we will see local community action, local community obstacles put up and deployed to prevent Patriot actors and Patriot voters and Patriot candidates from participating in the electoral process. And remember, President Bush, the second President Bush, George W. Bush in 2001, placed the United States of America under 50 U.S. Code section, I think 1702. It might have been 1502. I forget. It was one of those. He placed the United States into a state of military dictatorship. It happened on 9/23/2001. And so that national emergency stasis has to be fleshed all of the way out into the open. And it has to also conclude all of Donald Trump's national emergencies moving through this process, the various emergencies declared by executive order, the various emergencies declared under the U.S. Code and the Stafford Act, under Title 47, under Title 50, under Title 10, all of these different avenues, right, tie into the overarching theme. And so one of those themes has to be the realization of the emergency dictatorial status mode that has been put into place here in the United States of America, so that that mode can be switched off, so that that mode can be removed, right? And so it can be publicly removed so that people learn what happened, they learn what occurred, and they're able to prevent this from ever happening again. This is such a massive, massive operation. And to expect these deep state actors, those who are left on that other side, to go quietly into that good night and not attempt to utilize every lever of power at their bureaucratic agency disposal, every resource that they may have to obfuscate and block us from this process, We can't expect that. We have to acknowledge that these events and these things will come, and they will coincide themselves with other desperation maneuvers, right? They will coincide themselves with the attempt to release pandemic agents and reagents out into the world, right? They will coincide themselves with the escalation of conflict in Europe, the attempt to bring about a World War III style scenario, which will be, I think, utilized in Patriot Actor fashion to shift things around that need to be shifted around and to destroy forevermore the biological terrorism complex that exists in Eastern Europe and Southeastern Europe, all through the Levant area, all through the Middle East and Mesopotamian area, and also in the African and Pacific regions, right? This activity and a number of these other very dark criminal activities, to include trafficking, gun and weapon smuggling, and organ harvesting, etc., blood trafficking, etc., all of these things sort of tie themselves up nice and neat and together because a lot of the same infrastructure is used. But the biological terrorism, which is akin to weapons of mass destruction in pathogenic form, being promulgated around the world, has to be brought down in this process, and we're witnessing their desperation maneuvers, allowing us the doorway to go in and do exactly that. And one of the reasons that that we're doing exactly that is because their financial system, their financial matrix, their locus of control that they enslaved and ensnared the entire world with over the last 1,000+ years, is now beginning to lose in incredible form all of the different main components, all of the different reliable, dependable, what's the right word? Let me get the right word, because I want to drive home a very, very important point. All of their safe zones are no longer safe. And so the financial benefit of having those safe zones as a way to garner investor leverage off label, as a way to garner leverage of very influential financial pools without having a ledger record of that, has really ceased and begun. Well, it hasn't ceased, but it's been very seriously eroded. And we're witnessing that financial system and that pressure on that financial system, in conjunction with all of the other activities, which we've just discussed a moment ago, that is beginning to push those bureaucratic intelligence communities, that those deep state resistors, that remnant that we talk about, to their maneuvers that they're going to have to deploy to avoid total exposure and loss of control. So recently, I'm just going to go through a series of articles here. JP Morgan Chase profits falls after $2.9 billion fee from regional bank. The bank's quarterly earnings slipped 15% year over year in Q4 of 2023. This article put out 10 days ago, January of 2024. Shares of JP Morgan rose 1.9% during pre-market trading, which is unusual for a bank of that stature. An article from the Financial Times discussing Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley report their lowest profits in 4 years. This came out, looks like, well, it doesn't tell me on the date. It's behind a paywall, but I found it off of a Google search. Let me go up to the URL. Well, shucks, Patriots, I apologize. It looks like there's not a date to correspond with that, so perhaps disregard that one. Citigroup, an article taken from 12 days ago. Citigroup plans 20,000 job cuts as it reports its worst quarter in 14 years. An article taken from the South China Morning Post on the 17th of January. Hong Kong stocks sink, worst drop in 15 months. Alibaba, Tencent, Hong Kong, Shanghai Bank of China, HSBC, and AIA led market losses on China disappointment. So, and this is important to remember because HSBC, Hong Kong, Shanghai Bank of China, ties a lot of that dark money pool in biological terrorism activities in the Pacific Theater, along with organized crime payoffs and the funding of different organized cartel and gang groups in the Pacific Rim region, to include those Southeast Asian nations and the island nations, are held up in organizations and large banks such as HSBC. And we had the Panama Papers and the Paradise Papers later that came out and told us exactly that. Also, HSBC is heavily involved in debt management with the Bank of England. and the Bank of England is involved in this central bank process. Again, one of those main cornerstone pillars that is being pressed for its solvency and being pressed for its health, right? Just recently, we saw Truist. Actually, this reported by the Wall Street Journal. Truist swings to loss. The bank posted a net loss of more than $5 billion, compared with $1.7 billion in net income a year ago, which means they lost $6.7 billion in asset management control in a year in net gains for the bank itself, right? $6.7 billion, right? This loss, is the article states, it was driven by non-cash goodwill impairment charge of $6.1 billion, which the bank said was due to the continued impact of higher rates and discount rates. But it also took a $507 million charge to replenish FDIC Corp funding used to make uninsured depositors whole after the failure of Silicon Valley. So they're shifting money around so quickly because they have to. They're trying to plug all of the holes in their dam, and their dams really aren't they're not holding up at the pace that they would like them to, right? These dams are collapsing in real time, and these energy markets that are being pressed worldwide in this military operation that's happening are driving a lot of that down as it pertains to the US dollar, which has been a slave holder for commerce and trade around the world for a very long time. We're moving into an ICE 9 protocol period. ICE 9 protocol being an exercise conducted by the CIA to prepare for financial Armageddon. And we saw a war game right along the lines of ICE 9 played out in Israel, of all places, in the fall season, I believe it was, of 2021, discussing a worldwide collapse of the SWIFT system as a result of cybersecurity and cyber and hybrid warfare attacks all around the world. And we know that the cybersecurity issue has been happening for a number of months now in the financial space and in the space of all of the different corporate bureaucracies and all of the different regulatory agencies and government. Many embarrassing things are being outed. Many accounts, are being accessed from different nation state actors, and we really don't know all of who these actors are, right? We're witnessing a hybrid warfare campaign waged around the entire world, and we the people get a front row seat to witnessing the system that has really put us through heck and back, dismantled, disempowered, placed into a position where there is a powerful failure to start by those actors that have always held these reins and have always been themselves the masters of the universe. It is a magical, is a wonderful time. We are in a crisis of the ages mode for them, if there ever was one, and we the people come out victorious on the other side. This is the year of the dragon. The Chinese New Year 2024 being the year of the dragon. This is the year, I think, that you're going to see that worldwide serpent known as the US dollar, which itself is based on a sigil that includes a serpent wrapped around a staff, fall. You're going to see the removal of the U.S. economic war machine and the ability of the Washington, D.C. U.S. aid arm and the various slush funds held up by these intelligence communities who know that these conclusive events and this mass exposure and awakening is inevitable and is coming. You're going to see that system taken off of the board. Coinciding with that, I think, is likely to be quite a bit of political turmoil, geopolitical turmoil, and especially here in the Western nations, attempts at throwing us back into these MK Ultra programs, these fear-based programs, by attempting to frighten us, intimidate us at the last minute, and quite frankly, their attempt to subvert our due process and our constitutional processes here at home, wherever you happen to be, wherever home is for you, in exchange for the expansion of their totalitarianism and their bureaucracy. This process will lead to the total collapse of the shadow government. This process will lead to the total exposure of NATO as a hollow alliance that actually wages more warfare on its own self and within its own bloc than it does around the rest of the world, and it wages a tremendous amount around the rest of the world. This is the year where a fair system of value exchange will be debated and instituted as we move into that 2025 season. This is the year where a fair perception of the planet as it is and of the events that have been happening over the last 3 to 5 years, and then providing that clarity going back decades, will be achieved in the mass consciousness space. This is the year that mass awakening congeals, and humanity and we the people realize that while we may have differences and we may have cultural interpretations that we like to filter through our lens, right, and appreciate the world from our belief standpoint, that we are all also human, and that we are humanists, and that we are for one another, and we are for the success of the whole, but from the individual, from the protection of the rights and sovereignty of the individual. We're spiritual creatures, and we're returning to a respect for that nature, and respect for that very nature and that very identity should govern our actions, our beliefs, our knowledge, our peacefulness, our wisdom, and our movement through life going forward as often as it possibly can. We are filled with the Holy Spirit. We have access to the Christ consciousness and Christ's teachings and Christ's forgiveness. We have access to the energy, the spiritual force that brought the earth and all of the wonders of all creation and the resource of that which is everything into existence. You could not be more powerful. They could not be more afraid. It is us or them, and we win and they lose. I'll be back with each of you again soon, everyone. Stay safe. Remember to appreciate who and what you are and the time that you get to live and the stories that we will tell as we march forward as one we the people and one mankind for all of our posterity. I'll be back with each of you again soon. This is SG Anon. Thanks. Bye-bye.